This is the Combinations Podcast. I'm Kyle, the Digital Content Lead, and in 2026, we're starting off the Combinations Podcast a little bit different to what we left off in 2025. We're still doing our insights on the staff and the amazing work they do on the front line and the projects that show you the NHS behind closed doors. But to start 2026, we're actually getting involved with our executive team who are going to show and give you their experiences of the workplaces that they've worked in and what shaped them to be the leaders of Combined. And it's supposed to show their experiences and what they've learned, either that being good or bad, has shaped them to make sure that our trust can be the best it can and really showcase why we're outstanding in all we do and how we do it. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Frieza Mahmood and Ben Richards to share their experiences.
Hi, this is Frieza Mahmood. We're here with my lovely colleague Ben Richards to talk to you about advocacy for inclusion. It'll be the first in a series of podcasts that we're intending to do with leaders across the organisation, and I think it's probably really important that Ben and I start with why we're here and what we're hoping to achieve from this. So Ben, I'm here to bring you in on that point.
Yeah, thanks Fraser. So I think this has always been something that's been close to my heart, and I think that's probably for a number of areas actually. So I know we talk about protected characteristics and we love to put people in a box, but actually I hold a number of protected characteristics, and I think that does change your outlook on the world a little bit. But I also recognise that I'm from a very working class background, first in my family to go to university, saw the benefits that education could bring and how that's impacted on my life, but also recognise that I got my own advocates on the way that helped me on that journey. So I think there's something there, and we might come on to that a bit later. But there's probably one that holds quite true for this specific area around policy diversity and inclusion, and that's probably about 10 to 15 years ago in my own career. I went for a job at an acute hospital elsewhere in the country, and went through the interview process. Very senior panel, coup, chief people officer, deputy coup. I think there might have even been a non-exec on the board. So very senior panel. Went through the interview, got the job, and about 6 months later, I was out for dinner with the person who was my new boss. We doing a bit of socialising, and we're having a conversation. Somehow my interview came up, and to be fair to her, she thought I already knew the information that she was about to impart on me, but she told me about how after the interview panel had concluded, they're having a discussion about who was appointable, and I was the highest scoring candidate, but were they able to appoint me? And I'm sitting there over dinner thinking, where's this going? And they then proceeded to have a conversation about knowing the chief exec at the time, who was considered to be quite old-fashioned in his views on homosexuality. Was it fair on me to put me in a position where I'd potentially be in at least a semi-hostile working environment? And they obviously decided that they still did appoint me because I'd been in the job 6 months by that point. But I remember how I felt at that exact moment. And what was going on inside my head, and I think it was always an important topic for me. But I remember sitting there at that moment and thinking, I want, as a result of my action or my inaction, I never want anyone to feel like I did in that moment.
Yeah. And how did you feel, Ben? Do you mind?
I think after going through the moment of disbelief and have I really just heard what I think I've heard, I think probably a feeling of devastation actually, because for me it wasn't even in the thought process. It was not. If you'd have said to me in advance, where do you think this conversation might go? It wasn't there, because it was just a non-issue for me. But it did open my eyes probably a little bit more around how those kind of issues can impact on people and become their lived experience. And so it's an important marker for me that I still look back on at this day, that that I've had in other conversations that I might not be able to someone else. I won't have lived their life, I won't have had their experiences, but I can empathise with it, and I can translate that in some way to some of the things I've witnessed or experienced or know about.
I can't imagine how incredibly difficult that would have been, and not only unexpected, but just the trauma of having to deal with something like that in such a stark way that probably seemingly was made as a passing comment, and in a social environment as well, where you're sort of not really even sure how to respond and react to it. But it's absolutely to your credit that you've been able to process that and then try to use it as a positive to make a difference to others.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things for me is that was probably an extreme circumstance, but in all this, people, we're human beings, people don't always get things right, do they?
Yeah.
But for me, it's about how you use that and learn from that, either yourself or others, and moving things forward. And I think sometimes in this space, I do it, I imagine you do as well. Sometimes we have a view, we try and do the right thing, and we hold back actually, and we think, I won't do that, and we overthink it sometimes. And it's a really difficult balance, because we really don't want to offend people and we don't want to get it wrong. But there's something about how do we create more safety in this space that people can raise if they have some concerns, but people also feel able to learn where they don't know or don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of turning it into something constructive and positive and creating that opportunity to learn is something that absolutely speaks to my heart, and I know it's at the forefront of what you're wanting to get from this experience as well. I was just reflecting myself on not the same scenario or situation as the one that you've just relayed, but something sort of comparable in terms of level of shock. But I was really unprepared for how to deal with it, because it came from someone that I really had a lot of respect for, and I know that was trying to be very well-meaning and well-intentioned. So some people may know that this is not my first executive role. I've carried out an executive role at Chief People Officer level previously, and when I was first appointed to my first Chief People Officer role on a substantive basis, I had a colleague who I regarded not just as a colleague but as a close friend approach me and actually say, in a very well-intentioned, well-meaning way from their perspective, I know this person, I know their heart and their values, so that would have been the intention, but essentially say to me, there's going to be a lot of people out there that are thinking, has she just been appointed because she is from an ethnic minority background? And has she just been, appointed because she looks diverse and, and it makes the board appear more representative? I don't believe that, is the comment that my colleague made, and I really believe in you. So it's your job now to prove that all of those people wrong. And in that moment, my heart just sank into my feet. I didn't know what to say. I was embarrassed. I was shocked. I wanted to cry. I still feel a little bit emotional about it now, because I never, until that moment that this person who I really loved and cared for said this thing that they were looking out for me, ever actually thought that I had been appointed because of my race or religion or whatever, or because I was a woman. But in that moment, my it questioned and shook my confidence in myself, and I questioned everything that I thought that I knew about myself, and I still to this day don't know whether I was or wasn't, appointed for the right reasons. And it really had a fundamental impact, not just on me in that moment. I didn't even feel able to sort of challenge my colleague in the moment, because I felt like they were genuinely trying to, in their own clumsy way, look out for me. And it had an effect for the 6 years that I was a director in that organisation, of every single day my feeling like I could not show any level of vulnerability, that I had to absolutely do work as hard as I possibly could and at 150% of my capacity in order to demonstrate that I was the right hire for this job. And that just made me really stop and think, because I don't think I'd experienced a lot of sort of, obvious sort of bias or discrimination, or the potential for acknowledging that bias, or maybe I did and I was too obtuse to realise that that was the case. But it was, you know, and I it's not the same as your example, of course. That was even more, you know, upsetting, the fact that they thought about not appointing you for the job because of something outside of your control, in order to, you know, prop up a structure where, you know, bias is is accepted. But I just think that these things they sound very shocking when you talk about them, but they're probably things that happen all of the time, aren't they?
Yeah, and there's something in your bit as well of, you know, the fact that it said you have to prove. Well, actually, you don't have to prove anything in relation to that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
prove the best candidate, you got the job. That's what we expect of anyone. But even that thought, again, clumsy, was it with good intention, but actually saying you need to prove yourself because other people will make an assumption that you've been appointed in this way is completely bonkers. But like you say, probably happens day in, day out.
Yeah, and it started me thinking that, you know, most people in this space, they probably are trying. You know, it's not that they're not trying to sort of understand and connect with, you know, things that, so the colleague that you mentioned there, I think they were trying to say, look, you know, I was advocating for you in this situation because I think you're the right person for the job. And my colleague also, you know, probably in their head, but I don't think they realise like what lasting impact something like that could have had. And there probably would have been, you know, other ways that are open to them to be able to sort of, you know, maybe take me under their wing and, you know, give me a bit more sort of support and recognise that I'm going to, you know, be facing sort of challenges and difficulties as anyone would, but they might be sort of nuanced. And I never felt able for a long time to ever acknowledge with that colleague the conversation they had, but it took me about 2 years, believe it or not, to pluck up the courage to be able to do that, because it was a relationship I valued and I was really concerned about damaging it in any way. And I genuinely still felt like it was well-meaning, well-intentioned. And when I eventually had the conversation to say, do you realise how much doubt that put in my mind? And I know that what you were trying to do, but is there another way that you could have, like, they were really devastated, really, really upset, and really wanted to, you know, clarify that they, you know, they believed in me and they didn't, but I still sort of could not feel the same way about it, if you know what I mean, Ben. And I think, you know, there are moments in your life, aren't there? You may not appreciate them at the time, but afterwards you keep going back to them, and it just sort of shifts your view a little bit about the world around you, and what opportunities there are, you know, for people, and that it's not always about being the best and trying your best and in delivering, that there's other dynamics that are at play. And it sounds so naive and odd to say, but if you've never had to outwardly confront that before, that would be a shock, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it would. And I think this is where we get into a really difficult area, isn't it? Because people sometimes don't do something because they're scared of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But quite often doing nothing is worse than doing something. Not always, but mainly. And then people get paralysed, and then, you know, and I think that's a journey we're all on. We're in different places, but it's something we're all on, isn't it? I suppose awful experience, and obviously had a lasting impact on you for a period of time, and still today will influence it. I suppose I think one of the positives that comes from these situations, at least from my perspective, though, is they help you recognise some of your own biases, don't they? And how sometimes that may play out in some really not very obvious places. So as a very different situation, for example, I've had fed back to me that quite often if I'm recruiting with senior level jobs in the same area, my expectation has been that people reach out in advance before that sort of shortlisting stage, and we have a conversation. Took some working through to me when I had some feedback, actually, that in some cultures that's actually very much frowned upon and wouldn't happen, and how does that potentially disadvantage people? So I think it knocks onto a range of different things in different ways, doesn't it? And you know, if we could, I suppose it's an interesting one. If you could turn back time and had a magic wand,
Yeah.
would you want that situation to go away, or is it part of who you are?
I think that it's part of who I am now. It's kind of part of my sounds really bizarre way to describe it, but almost like my reformed identity as a person, and my sort of embedded it into my values from the perspective of what am I trying to do, what am I trying to achieve, how am I showing up in that space to ensure that other people do feel recognized for their value and their contribution, and what am I doing to push myself out of my comfort zone and my normal sort of mindset to think in a different way about how things could be received and impacted. And I just feel like in life there's just no point in having regrets, because every time you go through something, even it could be really incredibly difficult, and we've all had our difficulties, haven't we, our challenges. I feel you learn about the world, you learn about yourself, and you grow.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be the person that you are now without those experiences. So no, I don't think I would. I think if you'd asked me maybe 5 years ago, I probably would be like, yeah, I wish that never happened. I wish I didn't know. But I did sort of learn a lot about myself as well, and it helped me to reframe my thinking. But to the extent where I realised that I was also quite like protected in a way, in terms of like in a work sense, you're kind of you develop your little bubbles, don't you? You sort of like your sort of educational or developmental bubble when you're studying, and then you're with other people who are normally sort of reasonably like-minded. So I started my career journey in the NHS on the National Management Training Scheme. So it was very much with, broadly speaking, a bunch of people who thought the same way, had been recruited for the same or similar sort of values, and so you can confirm a lot of your own biases through those individuals and get this sense of the world that is not entirely in keeping with some of the challenges that others encounter in the world. And I realised that that's informs some of my sort of approach. When I was younger, I just used to think the whole world's out there laid out for you, and it's yours. It's all on your shoulders. It's up to you. All you have to do is just work as hard as you possibly can. Just keep pushing through, and you'll get anywhere you want to go. And now I think I am a bit wiser and I realise that that's not the case, and that you will face obstacles, and your path may not be a straight path, but you will ultimately get to where you need to be, not necessarily where you thought you wanted to be. I think I'm glad that my eyes have been open to it, and I try to, like you do, I know that you're very active in trying to think about, well, how can I embrace this opportunity, this learning to benefit others now, because others at this current time, Ben, I know we have our conversations about this, but it feels like it's becoming increasingly more difficult in society. There's a lot of polarized views, like politically and socially, and so it's becoming a place where, unfortunately, diversity, celebrating difference, and recognizing the benefits that having inclusive environments bring, both in socially but also sort of in a work sense, then they're not necessarily perceived in the mainstream. And I'd say the media, and also at times, political narratives and things don't help this as being the desirable state. We're almost questioning, and in some ways going backwards in a way that makes people feel vulnerable. So I think that there's space for people like you and I who have experienced those challenges ourselves to help support others through the benefit of our experience, and to try and connect that in some way that is positive.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think probably going back to the title where we started, isn't it? I think that's why allyship is very important, because you don't have to have experienced that particular area, but a greater understanding of that. And I don't know, my own perception and experience is, if you look at different groups, giving them greater access or rights or access into a space doesn't normally involve taking that access or rights away from someone else. So it's not, well, if they have more rights over there, then this group over here have less. Normally it's just about bringing them up a bit. Yeah, at the moment it seems to be, well, if we do that, that's a terrible thing. Well, I really struggle with that, because surely we want everyone to have as equality of opportunity as much as possible.
Yeah.
But like you say, it doesn't feel like we're necessarily in that space at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think there's a wider societal debate there as well, isn't there? That freedom of speech versus being part of the human race.
Yeah.
So I think there is, and we have to recognise that part of this is wider than us and individuals. But I suppose going back to an early point, doesn't mean we can't make a difference ourselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then just on that point of difference, because I know that you do this, every day, and the conversations that we have, this comes up. But are there any examples of just some small or simple things that you think can be done that have you've benefited from, or that you've tried to help make a difference to other people? Are there any sort of not big things that anyone could sort of do really?
So I think there's probably a couple of things that I probably try and do. And I know we talk about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and that's easy to say, but it's quite often very difficult to do. But actually sometimes just taking even 30 seconds to take a step back and go, my thought process running from A to B down this route, and actually how would it be different if I was in a different group? Just that consciousness of stopping and actively trying to think, even if you haven't got the answer, I think is important.
Yeah.
If nothing else, it's just a speed bump to just slow you down a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there is that thinking of, if I'm making it better for a group over here, is it making worse for another group over on the other side? Because sometimes that's the assumption, but it's very rarely, in my experience, true.
Yeah.
And I think take that to an extra step is when we talk about care planning, we talk about individualised care and we talk about individuals, but then sometimes we leave those skills and that thought process at the door when we talk about other topics, and actually why? Because it's no different. And there's I was talking to a group of school and children's leaders a few months ago, and it was the whole debate around pronouns, and it was getting a little bit animated, and we actually boiled it down at the end that said, I could change my name to John tomorrow by default, and I could go around asking people to call me John, and people might not get it right so often, but no one would bat an eyelid about calling me John. And it doesn't impact on them, but it's really important to me. Yet we talk about pronouns and we politicise it, and it's not a thing. Actually, they are exactly the same. So I think for me, sometimes it's, if you take the label off the issue and gave it a different name or thought of it in a different context, would you have the same reaction? And if you would, it's pretty much normally the right thing to do. You've had the right reaction, but sometimes we just need to take that step back. So it's interesting for me to say as a coup, and people who know me know I do things at 100 miles an hour and want to do 5 different things at once. But one of the things that really important for me is to stop, think, don't always get it right, but actually just building in that bit of time sometimes is to do it, and accept that I'm not always going to get it right, but where I don't, try and minimise the negative impact of that on others, and learn from it myself.
And I think that's really lovely, Ben, because I think that we would recognise and that would resonate with people. And I was just thinking when you were saying that you're giving an insight into yourself, which I think is always a really powerful starting point, isn't it? To build connection, which is what we're talking about. That's what inclusion is, isn't it? It's creating that connection between us and focusing on the things that we value and with shared values and that we have in common, and valuing that, celebrating that. I was hoping to ask you, what, are there any things that you would like people to know about you that that people are not sort of aware of, that you think would help to, for them to know you better and to build that connection?
So I think people who know me even a little bit know that I am originally from around this area actually, but then I after I'd sort of done that college era, went off to uni and then moved away, and I've worked around different places of the country. But so I think that there's that local connection there. But I was a person who maybe felt that I couldn't get the opportunities that I needed in the local area, and that's driven some of the things that I do now. So I mentioned before about being the first in my family to go to university. That has meant, as I've gone through my career, you would think, being the coup, that I've got more than enough to do, as everyone else has. But I feel a really strong sense to give back to the wider community
Yeah.
where I can.
Yeah.
So that has meant I've done work roles in charities, for example. I am currently Vice Chair at Stoke-on-Trent College, because again that's around that education. I am actually a qualified teacher, which
Wow.
many people may not know, and that's because I started actually my career in education, and then had a bit of a disconnect from that, because I was doing more paperwork than teaching. And then came into the NHS, but I'm still qualified. But I think people who may have interacted with me, I'm not a particularly stereotypical coo.
Yeah.
The numbers and the widgets do need to be delivered, because that makes sure the patient's getting the care. But for me, it's about the people, and that's our staff and the patients. And actually, if we do the right thing by then, the numbers, the money, the widgets follow anyway. But I also recognise I am more than happy to be challenged and change my view. And I know that's easy for people to say sometimes, but I genuinely mean it. I don't know everything, none of us do. I am a vociferous learner. I always want to learn new things. And I think that's partially what drives some of the wanting to understand different perspectives, because that's part of that learning journey. For me. I don't know if I probably should see someone about this, but I'm doing a doctorate as well in my spare time.
So if you haven't got enough to do.
I haven't got enough to do. But again, that's about actually staff experiences. We move them round and redeploy them, which we do every day. So again, it's about making a difference wherever we can, and I think that's really important for me. Because one of the things I also know I struggle with is where I'm engaging with someone who has a very distinct mismatch of values. It's very rare, because I think most people do have some commonality of values, but I really struggle when that isn't the case.
But you're trying to sort of still, come at it from a place of understanding, to try and work with it. And I know that you're, curious, you try to get to know people, and it was really heartening to see that sort of thread of public service, public life coming through in all of the things that you were talking about. This, I want to make a difference, I want to add value, I'm conscious of the need to give back, and I'm probably happy and grateful to be where I am, so I want to make the most of this opportunity.
And I think going back to that allyship as well, I recognise along my career and life journey, there have been some key individuals who, have given me that little bit of an extra shove or a little bit of a leg up, that have enabled me to either try something that maybe I hadn't even thought of, or have given me that little bit of advice that said, actually, sometimes it's about your own self-confidence, isn't it? Other people have got faith in you. We can be our own worst critics. So I think that there's that bit there as well. So. But now I'm intrigued about what I'm going to learn about you.
Well, I think that you will take some time to get to know me. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, Ben. And I think a sort of surface, level, I think you probably know me quite well, and we're building that deeper sort of connection now and understanding each other better from a values perspective. But there's a lot of layers to me. I think we're all like really complex, aren't we, as individuals, because we're a product of the experiences and things that we go through that continue to shape us even now. But for me, like you very much, I am public sort of servant at heart. I always, feel this intensity of responsibility to try and put good out into the world and hopefully receive that good back. And I try to do that, in my job, in the everyday interactions that I have, and in the other things that I choose to do sort of outside of work. I, like you, also continue to challenge myself, but I've realised that the older that I get, the less that I actually know. And that's something that I was thinking before our chat today. There was a quote I was reflecting on, and it really resonated with me, and I wanted to share it with you as well, Ben. It's by a poet and a little bit of a philosopher called Rumi. I don't know if you're familiar. The quote is, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself." And I thought that was quite beautiful, because it shows the potential that we all have to make a difference, but it starts with us. So I thought maybe that was a nice way to end our session, and you and I will continue to get to know each other, and I hope that we'll continue to get to know the wider leadership team and people in the organisation that really want to be part of making this change and creating an organisation that we all feel like a sense of belonging and commitment to.
Right.
Thanks so
Thank
much for your time, Ben. It's been an absolute privilege to spend this time with you.